Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Roadmaster Diode Wiring on a 2019 Ford Fiesta. Now this wiring kit is going to have your diodes and the diode wiring to allow you to get your plug up front and run it all the way back to your taillights and tie into it. But there are going to be 5 different options available, and that kind of depends on your application and what other components you're going to be picking up. So here today we just had the basic kit, as it was just wire and your diodes. You can also get it with a 4-pole end, and you can also get it with an umbilical, which will come with the plug as well. And those umbilicals can be a straight cable, a hybrid cable, or a coiled cable. Now we chose to just use the basic kit today, and that's because they picked up the Roadmaster Nighthawk, which already has the umbilical and comes with the plug. Now, you may have seen magnetic tow lights that people have, and that will go to your RV, and those work just fine, but that's one more thing that you have to store. And the thing with the diode wiring is once you have it installed, it's pretty well you just plug in your umbilical to from the RV, and they're gonna work. And another thing to consider too is depending on your braking system, some of them do require tying into that diode wiring for some of the signals from the RV, so it might be required depending on your braking system. And the diodes are pretty simple. They tie into your taillights to get your running lights as well as your turn signal and brake lights. And that way, when you're plugged into your umbilical, it'll transmit the light sequence from the RV to the taillights of your vehicle. And that way you can let people know behind you what you're intending to do. So it's kind of like adding trailer lights to a trailer because your car is towed behind. So it's really easy. It ties into your factory wiring, and you will be doing a little bit of cutting and splicing, but overall it's not too bad to get installed. Now, for the install of diode wiring, the hardest part is going to be running the wires. And this car is fairly easy to do. If you're doing your base plate, then you're in luck. Leave that fascia off to get your wires in place. And so I've started off here. Eventually, we're going to be mounting our 6-pole. So I've just looped my diode wiring here just to make sure that I have extra. And then I've just kind of routed it on the base plate and made my way up to the engine bay. And as I routed it kind of up through here, I made an extra loop, and that's because our braking system, we're using the stay and play duo on this vehicle. It is going to need to tie into this. So to have this in place in the engine bay makes it a lot easier when you have to splice these together. You can work right here. So I recommend always pulling up a little extra, about a foot or so. That way it's going to be a little bit easier to, again, tie into that braking system. Now from here I started routing it down, and I'm going to raise the vehicle up and I'll show you the rest of the path. Now as I made my way down the engine bay, I kind of tucked the diode wiring behind stuff to keep it out of the way of any suspension, exhaust, anything that might pinch the wires. And we have a sway bar there, so I kind of just made sure to route it tight against the firewall. And from here, I just used the factory brackets that they have for brake lines and fuel lines. And make sure you're not zip tying to any of the hard lines. I used the plastic bracket, but it makes it really easy to just kind of run this in here. And then at this point, I kind of just routed around our fuel tank and then made my way back. Now at this point, I separated my white wire. I just peeled it back and pulled it. And at this point, I cut off the extra wire. I'm going to be using that as a jumper. So I have this. We will be using this to tie into both lights. And also we need to put a ground. So that's a good choice to do it here. So I went ahead and put a ring terminal on here. I'm just going to self-tap this onto the frame, and that way we have our grounding process. But the rest of the wires, I just continue down the frame here, and I'm going to start to make my split and tie into our taillights. But before we do that, we're going to have to get our taillights out of the way. That way we can find our wiring. Now to get our taillights out, go ahead and open your trunk, and you're going to find a plastic push pin that's here. You're going to want to use a trim panel tool if you can. These can get a little bit tricky here. And we'll just pry this out. And if the plastic clip breaks, that is fairly common, and this one is really fighting me here. Now this was a little bit tricky to get off. If you can always find replacements. We actually sell Performance Tools, has a bunch of plastic clips here if you need to pick some up. But that way if you need to replace this, if yours doesn't come out very easily as ours kind of fought us, you can go ahead and get that fixed. Now this interior panel here, just peel this back, and that's going to give us access to this thumb screw. So we'll just go ahead and twist this. Now there is a clip here on the outside, so you may need to just pry that straight out. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and unplug our taillight. That way we can get better access to our plug. So just push that tab in and that should separate. Now our yellow and brown wires, these are going to run to our left turn signal and also tie into our running light signal, where we're going to use that extra white wire to jumper over. And our green, I split this, as this is going to be our right turn signal, and I just kind of routed it over on the impact bar on the rear, and eventually we'll be pulling this up to that taillight. Now at this point we do need to get a little bit more access to our wires, so they have this kind of carpeted tape wrap insulation around it. So if you can peel it off. It is kind of tricky. Your best bet sometimes is to take a small razor blade, or I have a small pair of snips here, and just trim this back, and it will make it a little bit easier if you have a slit. Just be careful to not damage your wires in the process. Now that we have an opening here, we're going to take an airline tube. This is just a fish wire technique to pull our wires up. So if you have a string and tie a nut to it, anything like that, to get this passed down, and then we can tape our wires up, making it easier to pull our wires down below to where we need them to be. Now we're going to be pulling up the yellow and brown wires here, but also we want to pull up our jumper wire so we can make this run over to the other side. So with a little bit of electrical tape, I'll just tape these to the end of our pull wire and get these pulled up. I'm just going to pull out any of that extra slack that we have. Now with our insulation peeled back, we are going to go ahead and cut our wires. Now I've gone ahead and tested these, and on the driver's side, our stop and turn is going to be the gray and orange. So I'm going to cut pretty far back here as this plugs in. That's going to make it to where we're able to get our diodes mounted in here nice and clean. So go ahead, make a cut here. And then our running light is going to be green and purple. So we'll get that one separated, and we'll cut that as well. Now we can go ahead and strip all these ends back, and we're going to put spade connectors that are attached to the diodes currently on each of these. Now these are pretty thin gauge wires here, so what I do to just get a little bit better bite is bend over the end, and that way it's got a little bit more to bite onto on the spade connector. And then we'll just go ahead and crimp this down. Now on any of your connections, I recommend just giving it a quick tug after, and that way you know you have a solid connection. If it comes out pretty easy, you're going to want it to re-crimp that down. So I'm going to go ahead on all four ends and just put our blue spade connectors on. Now at this point, you can go ahead and take your diodes, and on the end where the plug is, that's going to be our out. So go ahead and plug these in. And then we'll take the same color wire and plug it into either one of these male ends of the spade connector here. And that leaves us with two open ones, which we are going to be tying into with the wires that we pulled up. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have enough length to be able to easily get to our diodes, but I'm going to cut off our excess here. And I'm going to strip back all the ends on these. So we're going to start here with our yellow, and I'm going to go ahead and put a blue spade terminal on here. And then our white and our brown is going to be for our running light, and this will run over to the other one. So we need to tie these together using the yellow spade connector, as it's for a larger gauge or two wires. Now we'll just route these through. And our running light is going to go to the green and purple, so we'll go ahead and get that one plugged in. And then our yellow is going to go to the gray and orange, so you can plug that one in. Now our taillight's going to go back in this pocket here, so this may be pressed against the metal edge. So I'm just going to wrap some extra electrical tape around here. If you have some small wire loom, the main thing is we want the taillight to still seal up. So this should be small enough, but also protect it against that metal edge just from chafing. And at this point, we can go ahead, we'll grab our taillight and we'll get this back in place. Now I've gone ahead and got our taillight plugged back in and put our thumb screw, tighten this down, and our electrical tape's right where it needs to be, so I'm happy there. Now as far as your diodes, you do have double-sided tape here, so I just stuck one to the other and pressed it up here so it's nice and protected. So now at this point, I'm going to go ahead and get our carpeting back in place here, and then we're going to remove the taillight on the passenger side. And the way that I routed my green wire over, I'm also going to run my white wire over so we can get our running light signal. Now on our passenger side, the colors are going to change just a little bit. So I've gone ahead and just tied these all up. It's going to be the same process as we did on the driver's side, but our running light is going to be the white with orange. So make sure you're running that white jumper wire over to tie into that. And then as far as our stop and turn, we have green and orange, so our green wire will go to that. So we'll go ahead and get our taillight plugged in, put back in place, and I'll get these taped up. And once you have your fascia put back in place, you're ready to mount up your 6-pole. Now this kit does not come with it, but the tow bar that this customer has chosen actually comes with one. So that's something to consider, is either picking up a kit that may have this or a tow bar that might have it. Either way, this is going to how you're going to make your connection with the umbilical to the RV. So we've gone ahead and cut off our excess wires and stripped those back. We're going to take the boot off of the plug and just slip this back for now. And pretty easy here actually. You have little terminals where those wires are going to go into, and you're just going to be using a small Phillips head screwdriver to back those out. Don't take them out completely because they are pretty tricky to find once they come out all the way. So just back it out enough to where you can get your wires in place. And there's going to be letters that are embossed here that will denote where they need to go. So we only have our 4 wires here, so pretty easy. I'm going to start with my ground, which is GD, and that's going to be white. So just make sure that you have all these nice and clean. And then once you put this in that terminal, you'll just tighten it down enough to snug the wires in. You don't need to get crazy here. You don't want to damage the wires. So just kind of until it's snug. And it should be able to hang by itself. So we'll go ahead and get these other ones attached. Pretty easy. Your taillight marker, brown, is going to go to TM. We have our yellow, which is going to be our left turn, which will be LT. And our right turn is going to be RT, which is going to be green. So go ahead and get those all hooked up. Okay, we got those all snug. So what I'll do is I'm going to put our boot here. And with electrical tape, I'm going to wrap this section here so it keeps a nice watertight seal, and it's going to keep that boot from backing out. Something else you might want to do, it's up to you, is with some wire loom, you can route it on these wires back and tuck it into the boot and tape that up. It's just going to give it a little bit cleaner look than being able to see the colored wires through your grill. Now we'll just tuck the rest of our wires back, and then you'll see these tabs here are going to take a self-tapper, and I'm able to mount this up here. And it is plastic, so obviously you don't have to crank this down too hard. You just need to make sure that it's nice and snug. That should be good. Now all that's left to do is test to make sure that it's working. Best way to do that is hook your umbilical up to your 6-pole and your 7-pole end up to your RV and run through the light sequence to make sure that it's working properly. Now we're going to be testing our lights. We have a test box here, but it's going to simulate hooking up to an RV with our umbilical. So I'll start off with our running lights. Next, our left turn signal, our right turn signal, and then finally our brakes. Now that we know they're working properly, we're ready to hook up and hit the road. Now, if you are turning on your left or right turn signal and it's pulsing your braking system, you might need to adjust the sensitivity on your braking system to get that properly dialed in, because it is using the turn signal and brake light as one connection. So you might want to check that before troubleshooting any wires. And that was a look and installation of the Roadmaster Diode Wiring Kit for a 2019 Ford Fiesta.